I never thought I would end up in a courtroom watching three of my neighbors sob over their charred houses. But here I was, and the whole disaster started because Karren Whitmore thought my grass was half an inch too tall. My name is Nathan Voss, and I bought my house in the Meadowbrook Commons subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona 3 years ago. It was a decent place, nothing fancy, just a standard 3-bedroom ranch with a small yard and a view of the desert hills in the distance. I worked as a mechanical engineer for a robotics company downtown, so I was gone most days from 7 in the morning until 6 at night. The house was my sanctuary, and I kept it in good shape. The inside was always clean, my vehicles were maintained, and I mowed my lawn regularly. But apparently, regularly was not enough for the Meadowbrook Commons Homeowners Association. Karren Whitmore was the HOA president, a position she had held for the past 7 years, according to my neighbors. She was in her early 50s, had that specific haircut that screamed entitlement, and drove a white Lexus SUV with a custom license plate that read, HOPRESS. I had only spoken to her a handful of times, mostly when she left notices on my door about minor infractions. The garbage cans were visible from the street after pickup hours. My mailbox needed repainting. My front door wreath was not in accordance with the approved decorative guidelines. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $50 to $200, and each time I paid them just to avoid the hassle. The grass situation started in early March of this year. I'd been traveling for work, spending 2 weeks in California helping set up a new manufacturing facility. When I got back, my grass had grown a bit longer than usual. Arizona in March can be unpredictable with rain, and apparently we had gotten more than expected while I was gone. The grass was maybe 3 inches tall, which was pushing the HOA limit of 2.5 inches according to the covenants I had signed when I bought the house. I came home on a Thursday evening, exhausted from the flight, and found a bright orange notice stuck to my front door. It was from Karren, naturally, informing me that my lawn was in violation of community standards and that I had 72 hours to remedy the situation or face a $500 fine and further action. I crumpled the notice in my hand and looked at my lawn. It was not that bad. A little long, sure, but it was green and healthy. I made a mental note to mow it that weekend and went inside to unpack. Friday at work was brutal. We had issues with one of the robotic arms malfunctioning, and I spent 12 hours troubleshooting hydraulic systems and reprogramming safety protocols. I got home after dark, grabbed some takeout, and collapsed on my couch. Saturday morning, I woke up with every intention of mowing the lawn, but my company called with an emergency. One of our biggest clients had a complete system failure at their warehouse in Phoenix, and they needed someone there immediately. I was the senior engineer on call, so I had no choice. I spent all of Saturday and most of Sunday at that warehouse getting their systems back online. By the time I got home Sunday evening, I was too tired to even think about the lawn. I figured I would handle it first thing Monday morning before work. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning, planning to mow in the cool morning air before the Arizona heat kicked in. Monday morning, my alarm went off at 5. I dragged myself out of bed, put on some old clothes, and headed to my garage to get the mower. That's when I noticed something was off. My side gate was open, which was strange because I always kept it locked. I walked around to my backyard and froze. My entire lawn was gone, not mowed, gone. The grass had been burned away, leaving nothing but blackened earth and ash. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, and I could see scorch marks creeping up the base of my back fence. My heart was pounding as I walked further into the yard. My garden hose had melted in places, and the wooden posts of my fence were charred black. What the hell had happened? I pulled out my phone and immediately called 911. Within 15 minutes, a fire inspector and 2 police officers were at my house. The fire inspector, a middle-aged man named Rodriguez, walked around my property taking notes and photographs. "Mr. Voss, did you conduct any burning on your property in the last 24 hours?" he asked. "No, absolutely not. I was not even home. I have been working all weekend. I just got back last night around 8 and everything was fine then." Officer Daniels, one of the police officers, looked at my neighbor's yard. "Your grass is the only area affected?" "As far as I can tell, yes, but look at my fence and my hose. This was not a small fire." Rodriguez knelt down and examined the burn patterns. This looks like a controlled burn that got out of hand. See how it starts near your back fence line and spreads toward the house? Someone started this deliberately. My stomach dropped. Who would burn my lawn? Officer Daniels glanced at the orange notice still crumpled on my front porch table where I had tossed it. You have an HOA issue? I explained the whole situation, showing him the notice from Karren Whitmore. Both officers exchanged looks. We will need to speak with your HOA president, Officer Daniels said. This could be destruction of property, possibly arson if it was intentional. The fire inspector filed his report, and the officers said they would investigate. I called into work, explaining the situation, and my boss gave me the day off. I spent the morning documenting everything, taking my own photos and videos of the damage. My lawn was completely destroyed, and it would cost me thousands to replace the sod, not to mention the damaged fence and melted equipment. Around noon, Officer Daniels called me. Mr. Voss, we spoke with Karren Whitmore. She admitted to authorizing a controlled burn of your lawn. I nearly dropped my phone. She what? She claims that according to the HOA covenants, if a property owner fails to maintain their lawn within the specified time frame, the HOA has the right to enter the property and perform necessary maintenance at the owner's expense. She hired a landscaping company to burn off what she called overgrown and dead vegetation. My grass was not dead. It was just a little long. And who burns grass in March in Arizona? We are in fire season. We are aware, Mr. Voss. We have issued citations to both Mrs. Whitmore and the landscaping company for conducting an open burn without a permit and for negligent fire management. However, there is something else you need to know. My blood went cold. What? The fire did not stay contained to your property. It jumped your back fence and spread to the desert scrub behind your subdivision. It burned for about 3 hours before firefighters got it under control. 3 homes on the next street over suffered significant fire damage. 1 is a total loss. I sat down hard on my couch. Are you serious? Completely. The fire marshal is conducting a full investigation. This is no longer just a property dispute. We are looking at possible criminal charges. I hung up and sat in stunned silence. My grass being burned was bad enough, but now 3 houses were damaged because of Karren Whitmore's insane decision to burn my lawn. This was going to be a nightmare. The rest of that day was a blur. News crews showed up in the neighborhood by late afternoon. Apparently, word had spread fast about the fire, and reporters were interviewing residents. I stayed inside, not wanting to deal with the media circus. My phone kept ringing with calls from the HOA, from neighbors, from insurance companies. I ignored most of them. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It stated that I was being fined $5,000 for the damage caused by the fire that originated on my property. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. They were trying to blame me for a fire they had started. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Amanda Norton, and she specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I explained everything that had happened, sent her copies of all the notices, the police reports, and the letter from the HOA's attorney. Mr. Voss, this is one of the most egregious cases of HOA overreach I have ever seen, Amanda said during our phone consultation. Not only did they have no right to burn your property, but conducting an open burn without permits in fire season is incredibly reckless. The fact that it resulted in significant property damage to other homes makes this a serious legal matter. We are going to file a lawsuit against the HOA, Karren Whitmore personally, and the landscaping company she hired. We will also be filing counterclaims against any attempts they make to fine you. What are we looking at in terms of outcomes? I asked. Best case scenario, the HOA and Karren Whitmore are held liable for all damages, including the damage to your property and the 3 homes that burned. You will be compensated, and they will face legal consequences. Worst case, this drags out in court for years and everyone loses. But given the facts as you have presented them, I think we have a very strong case. I hired Amanda on the spot. Over the next few weeks, the situation exploded into a full-blown legal battle. The 3 families whose homes had been damaged filed their own lawsuits against the HOA and Karren Whitmore. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Meadowbrook Commons was infamous. The headlines read, HOA Gone Wild, Controlled Burn, Destroys 3 Homes, and Scottsdale HOA, President Faces Criminal Charges After Fire Disaster. The fire marshal's investigation concluded that Karren Whitmore had hired a landscaping company called Desert Clean Landscaping to perform what she described as vegetation removal on my property. She had given them access to my backyard by providing them with a master key that the HOA kept for emergencies. The landscaping company, which consisted of 2 guys with a truck and some basic equipment, had decided that the quickest way to remove my grass was to burn it. They had not obtained any permits, had not checked the weather conditions, and had not set up any fire breaks or safety measures. They simply poured some accelerant on my grass, lit it on fire, and tried to control it with a garden hose. When the fire started spreading faster than they anticipated, they panicked. Instead of calling 911 immediately, they tried to put it out themselves for almost 15 minutes. By the time they finally called for help, the fire had jumped my back fence and was racing through the dry desert scrub. The wind that day had been gusting up to 25 miles per hour, which made containment nearly impossible. Firefighters arrived within 10 minutes of the call, but by then, the fire had already reached the homes on Saguaro Drive, the street behind mine. The Hernandez family lost their home completely. It was a beautiful 2-story house with a pool, and they had lived there for 12 years. Miguel and Sofia Hernandez and their 2 teenage children barely got out with their dog and a few photo albums. Everything else was destroyed. The Patels next door had significant damage to their roof and backyard, with estimates over $200,000 to repair. The Johnsons on the other side had their entire back patio and master bedroom destroyed, with smoke damage throughout the rest of the house. I met Miguel Hernandez about a week after the fire. He came to my house one evening, his face drawn and exhausted. "Nathan, right?" he said when I opened the door. "Yes, you must be Miguel. I'm so sorry about what happened. I had no idea the HOA was going to do something so insane." He nodded slowly. "I know it was not your fault. The fire marshal explained everything. I just wanted to meet you face to face. We are all in this mess together now." I invited him in, and we sat in my living room talking for over an hour. Miguel was a high school teacher, and Sofia worked as a nurse. They were staying with Sofia's parents across town while they dealt with the insurance companies and tried to figure out their next steps. "The insurance is fighting us on some of the coverage," Miguel said. "They are claiming that because the fire was deliberately set, there might be exclusions. Our lawyer's handling it, but it is a nightmare. We lost everything. My daughter's childhood drawings, our wedding photos, Sophia's grandmother's jewelry, things you cannot replace." I felt a surge of anger. This is all on Karren Whitmore. She needs to pay for what she did. "Oh, she will," Miguel said with a bitter smile. "My lawyer said the criminal charges alone could put her in prison. And the civil suits? She's going to lose everything." Over the next few months, the legal proceedings moved forward. Karren Whitmore was charged with criminal negligence, reckless endangerment, and several fire code violations. The 2 men from Desert Clean Landscaping were also charged and immediately tried to make a deal with prosecutors, agreeing to testify against Karren in exchange for reduced sentences. They claimed she had specifically instructed them to do whatever it takes to clean up my property and had assured them that the HOA would handle any legal issues. The HOA itself was in complete chaos. Several board members resigned immediately, not wanting to be associated with the disaster. The remaining members called an emergency meeting and tried to distance themselves from Karren's actions, claiming she had acted without full board approval. But Amanda found emails and meeting minutes proving that Karren had discussed her aggressive enforcement strategy with the board multiple times, and no one had objected. The HOA's insurance company was refusing to cover the damages, claiming that Karren's actions fell outside the scope of normal HOA operations. This meant that the HOA's reserve funds, which totaled around $300,000, were going to be depleted by the lawsuits. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Commons was looking at a massive special assessment to cover the legal fees and settlements. My neighbors were furious. People who had nothing to do with the fire were now facing bills of $10,000 to $15,000 each to cover the HOA's liability. A group of homeowners started a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely, which required a 75% vote according to our covenants. The neighborhood was divided, with angry meetings every week that sometimes devolved into shouting matches. Through it all, Karren Whitmore remained defiant. In a news interview that went viral, she stood in front of her pristine home and declared that she had been doing her duty to maintain community standards. "I have dedicated 7 years of my life to keeping Meadowbrook Commons beautiful," she said into the camera. "If homeowners cannot follow simple rules about lawn maintenance, then the HOA must take action. What happened was an unfortunate accident, but I was only trying to protect our property values." The backlash was immediate and brutal. Comments flooded in, calling her everything from delusional to criminal. Someone created a parody social media account called HOA Karren that mocked her relentlessly. She became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach, featured in articles and discussions about the problems with homeowner associations across the country. My own life was a mess during this time. My backyard remained a blackened wasteland that I could not afford to fix until the lawsuits were settled. I had filed my own lawsuit against Karren, the HOA, and Desert Clean Landscaping for the destruction of my property, the damage to my fence and equipment, and emotional distress. Amanda was confident we would win, but the process was slow and frustrating. Work became my escape. I threw myself into projects, volunteering for overtime and travel assignments just to get away from the constant stress of the legal battles. My coworkers were supportive, but I could tell they were tired of hearing about my HOA nightmare. I stopped talking about it unless someone specifically asked. In July, 4 months after the fire, the criminal trial began. The prosecution had a mountain of evidence: the fire marshal's report, testimony from the Desert Clean Landscaping workers, emails from Karren detailing her enforcement plans, and statements from multiple homeowners about her increasingly aggressive tactics over the years. The defense tried to argue that Karren had believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president and that she had no intention of causing harm. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with Miguel, Sophia, and several other neighbors who had been affected. Karren sat at the defense table looking composed, her lawyer whispering to her constantly. She never once looked at any of us. The prosecution called me to testify on the 3rd day. I walked through everything, coming home to find my grass burned, the orange notice from Karren, my interactions with the police and fire marshal. The prosecutor showed the jury photos of my destroyed yard and the damage to my fence. "Mr. Voss, did you give the HOA or anyone else permission to enter your property and burn your grass?" the prosecutor asked. "Absolutely not. I had no idea they were even planning to do that. If someone had asked me, I would have mowed it myself. The grass was maybe half an inch over the limit. It did not warrant any of this." "And what has been the impact on your life since this incident?" I took a deep breath. "It has been devastating. My property is destroyed. I've spent thousands of dollars on legal fees. My neighbors lost their homes because of a decision I had nothing to do with. I feel guilty every time I see Miguel and Sophia, even though I know it was not my fault. This whole situation has turned my life upside down." Karren's lawyer tried to cross-examine me, suggesting that if I had just mowed my lawn on time, none of this would have happened. Amanda objected immediately, and the judge sustained it, but the implication hung in the air. I left the stand feeling angry and exhausted. Miguel's testimony was even more emotional. He described coming home from work to find his street blocked by fire trucks and police cars, the smell of smoke thick in the air. He talked about seeing his house engulfed in flames, about his daughter screaming, about grabbing their dog and running. When the prosecutor asked him what he had lost, Miguel broke down. "Everything," he said through tears. "We lost everything. Our home, our memories, our sense of security. My kids are traumatized. My daughter has nightmares about fires. We are living in a cramped apartment while we try to rebuild our lives. And for what? Because some grass was too long?" The jury was visibly affected. Several members were wiping their eyes. Even the judge looked somber. The defense called Karren to testify in her own defense, which Amanda said was a risky move. Karren took the stand and presented herself as a dedicated community servant who had been trying to maintain standards in a neighborhood she loved. I have always taken my role as HOA president seriously, she said. Our covenants exist for a reason, to protect everyone's property values. When homeowners ignore the rules, it affects the entire community. I made a decision to enforce those rules, and I hired what I thought was a reputable company to do the work. I had no idea they would be so negligent in their methods. The prosecutor tore into her on cross-examination. Mrs. Whitmore, did you obtain any permits before authorizing this burn? No, I did not think it was necessary for a small grass removal. Did you check the weather conditions that day, the wind speed, the fire danger level? I assumed the landscaping company would handle those details. Did you inform Mr. Voss that you were entering his property? The HOA covenants give us the right to enter for maintenance purposes. That was not my question. Did you inform him? Karren hesitated. No. So you used a master key to access his private property, hired a company to set his grass on fire without permits, without proper safety measures, without checking weather conditions, and without informing the property owner. Is that correct? When you put it that way, it sounds bad, but I was just trying to do my job. And 3 homes were destroyed because you were doing your job. No further questions. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Karren Whitmore was convicted of criminal negligence, reckless endangerment, and multiple fire code violations. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. The civil trials began in August. Miguel and Sophia's lawsuit went first, as their damages were the most severe. Their attorney presented evidence of the total loss of their home, the emotional trauma to their family, and the ongoing costs of displacement and rebuilding. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that the HOA itself should not be held liable for Karren's actions. But Amanda, who was co-counseling on the case, presented the emails and meeting minutes showing that the board had been aware of and had tacitly approved Karren's aggressive enforcement tactics. The jury awarded the Hernandez family $2.3 million in damages. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Miguel collapsed into his wife's arms, sobbing. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Justice was finally being served. The Patels and Johnsons settled their cases out of court for undisclosed amounts, but rumors put the total around $1 million combined. My own case went to trial in September. Amanda presented a straightforward argument. The HOA and Karren Whitmore had illegally destroyed my property, and I deserved compensation for the damages, the legal fees, and the emotional distress. The defense tried to argue that my damages were minimal compared to the other homeowners, but Amanda countered that it did not matter. The fire started on Mr. Voss's property because of an illegal and reckless action by the HOA. He is the first victim in this chain of destruction, and he deserves to be made whole. The jury awarded me $350,000, which included the cost of replacing my lawn and fence, reimbursement for legal fees, and compensation for emotional distress. I felt vindicated, but also exhausted. The whole process had taken a year of my life, and I was ready for it to be over. Karren Whitmore's sentencing hearing was in October. The judge had clearly been following the civil cases and was not sympathetic. He sentenced her to 4 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 2 years. He also ordered her to pay restitution to all the affected homeowners, though everyone knew she would never be able to cover the full amounts awarded in the civil trials. Mrs. Whitmore, your actions were not just negligent, they were arrogant, the judge said from the bench. You believed that your position gave you the right to do whatever you wanted, regardless of the law or the safety of others. 3 families lost their homes because of your recklessness. Mr. Voss had his property destroyed. An entire neighborhood has been thrown into chaos. You will serve your sentence and hopefully learn that no one is above the law, not even an HOA president. Karren was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, her face finally showing emotion. She was crying, her composed facade completely shattered. I felt no satisfaction in watching her break down. I just felt tired. The HOA itself was dismantled by the end of the year. The special assessments required to cover the legal judgments were so high that over 80% of homeowners voted to dissolve the association. It was a complicated legal process, But by January of the following year, Meadowbrook Commons was no longer under HOA control. People could paint their doors whatever color they wanted, could let their grass grow an extra inch, could park their cars on the street without fear of fines. I used part of my settlement money to completely redo my backyard. I hired a reputable landscaping company, not one that would set things on fire, and they installed new sod, replaced my fence with a beautiful cedar design, and even built a small patio area with a fire pit. The irony of having a fire pit after everything that had happened was not lost on me, but I figured I had earned the right to enjoy controlled fire on my own terms. Miguel and Sophia broke ground on their new home in March, almost exactly a year after the fire. The insurance money combined with their lawsuit settlement allowed them to build something even nicer than what they had lost. I went to their groundbreaking ceremony, along with dozens of neighbors who had rallied around them over the past year. It was a celebration, but also a memorial for what had been lost. "We are calling it our Phoenix House," Sophia told me, smiling for the first time in months. "Rising from the ashes and all that, it feels appropriate." "I think that is perfect," I said. "You guys deserve every good thing coming your way." Miguel shook my hand. "Thank you for standing with us through all of this, Nathan. We could not have gotten through it without neighbors like you." I felt a lump in my throat. We were all victims of the same insanity. I'm just glad we came out on the other side. The news coverage eventually died down, though Meadowbrook Commons remained a cautionary tale in HOA circles. I did interviews with a few reporters and even a podcast about HOA overreach. I became an accidental advocate for HOA reform, though I never sought out that role. I just wanted people to know that what happened to us could happen to anyone living under an HOA, and that these organizations needed better oversight and accountability. Karren Whitmore became a symbol of everything wrong with HOAs. Her case was cited in proposed legislation in Arizona, and several other states aimed at limiting HOA powers and increasing transparency. Some bills passed, some did not, but the conversation was happening. People were paying attention to the dangers of giving too much power to volunteer organizations with little oversight. I never spoke to Karren directly after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had divorced her husband while in prison, and that her former friends in the community had all turned their backs on her. Her house went into foreclosure after she could not make the payments from prison, and it sold at auction for well below market value. Everything she had worked to build, both personally and in terms of her reputation, was destroyed by her own actions. The two guys from Desert Clean Landscaping served 6 months each in county jail and were ordered to pay restitution. Their business was dissolved, and both of them ended up leaving Arizona entirely according to court records. They became footnotes in a larger story, examples of what happens when you take shortcuts and do not follow safety regulations. As for me, life slowly returned to normal. Work continued, and I actually got promoted to senior engineering manager, which came with a nice raise and more responsibility. I dated a bit, nothing serious, but I was not in a rush. The whole ordeal had taught me patience and the importance of fighting for what is right, even when it is exhausting and difficult. I stayed in my house in the former Meadowbrook Commons. Some people asked me why I did not move after everything that happened, but the truth was that I liked my house. I liked my neighbors, especially after we had all banded together to fight the HOA and support each other through the crisis. The community was stronger without the HOA, constantly threatening fines and enforcement actions. People actually talked to each other now, helped each other with projects, organized block parties without needing approval from some board. 2 years after the fire, I was sitting on my new patio on a cool evening in March, watching the sunset over the desert hills. My grass was perfectly maintained, not because I was afraid of fines, but because I took pride in my property. Miguel and Sophia's new house was finished, and I could see their lights on from my backyard. The Patels and Johnsons had fully repaired their homes and were back to normal life. The neighborhood had healed. My phone rang, and I saw it was Amanda Norton, my attorney. We had stayed in touch over the years, occasionally meeting for coffee to catch up. "Nathan, I wanted to let you know that Karren Whitmore is up for parole next month," she said. "The victims will have a chance to submit statements if you want to." I thought about it for a moment. "No, I think I have said everything I need to say. She's going to have to live with what she did for the rest of her life. That is punishment enough. Fair enough. How are you doing otherwise? Good, actually. Really good. Life is calm, work is great, and I am finally past all the stress of the last few years. I am glad to hear that. You deserve it. What you all went through was insane, but you handled it with grace. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked at the fire pit in front of me, unlit and safe. I thought about everything that had happened, all the chaos and anger and fear. I thought about Karren's face when the guilty verdict was read, about Miguel's tears when he described losing his home, about the moment I first saw my burned lawn and realized my life was about to change. The whole experience had taught me several important lessons. First, that HOAs, while sometimes necessary, can become dangerous when run by people who let power go to their heads. Second, that community matters and that standing together with your neighbors can make all the difference when facing a crisis. Third, that justice, while slow and imperfect, can still prevail if you are willing to fight for it. I also learned that sometimes the smallest things can spiral into massive disasters. An extra half-inch of grass should never result in homes burning down and people going to prison. But when you combine negligence, arrogance, and a complete disregard for rules and safety, even the smallest spark can cause an inferno. The neighborhood had several new families who had moved in over the past 2 years, people who had heard about what happened but chose to buy homes here anyway, because the lack of an HOA was actually a selling point. I had become friends with several of them, and we often joked about the irony that the worst thing that ever happened to Meadowbrook Commons ended up making it a better place to live. One Saturday afternoon, I was mowing my lawn, keeping it at a neat 2 inches just because that is how I liked it, when a moving truck pulled up to the house 2 doors down. A young couple got out, looking excited and a bit overwhelmed. I finished my section and walked over to introduce myself. "Hey there, I am Nathan. I live down the street. Welcome to the neighborhood." The guy, who looked to be in his late 20s, shook my hand enthusiastically. "Thanks. I am Mark, and this is my wife, Jessica. We are so excited to finally have our own place." "This is a great neighborhood," I said. "Very quiet, good people, and no HOA to deal with." Mark laughed. That was actually a huge selling point for us. Our realtor told us about what happened here a couple years ago. Sounds like it was intense. "That is an understatement," I said, "but we got through it and now we've got a real community here. If you need anything, help moving, recommendations for local services, whatever, just let me know." Jessica smiled warmly. "That's so kind. We actually wanted to ask, is the neighborhood doing anything for the 4th of July? We love hosting parties." "Funny you should mention that. We usually do a big block party. No permits required. No HOA telling us we cannot have fun. Just neighbors getting together. You guys should absolutely join us." We chatted for a few more minutes before I headed back to finish my lawn. As I pushed my mower across the grass, I felt a sense of contentment that had eluded me for a long time. Life was good. The neighborhood was thriving, and Karren Whitmore was sitting in a prison cell, hopefully learning that being HOA president did not make you a dictator. The legal settlements meant I had a financial cushion I had never expected. I'd paid off my mortgage, set up a solid retirement account, and still had money left over. I donated some of it to a local fire safety education program and to a nonprofit that helped families affected by house fires. It felt right to turn something terrible into something that could help others. Miguel and I became close friends through the whole ordeal. We started a monthly poker game with some of the other guys in the neighborhood, and it became a tradition. We never talked about the fire during poker night. That was our unspoken rule. Those evenings were about laughing, telling stupid jokes, and just enjoying each other's company. But the bond we had formed through shared trauma was always there, an undercurrent of understanding and support. Sophia and Jessica, the new neighbor, ended up becoming close as well. They started a neighborhood book club that met twice a month, and it quickly became popular with several of the women in the area. The community was knitting itself together in ways that never would have happened under the HOA's rigid structure. One evening in late summer, almost 3 years after the fire, I got an unexpected phone call from a producer at a national news network. They were doing a story on HOA abuses and wanted to feature our story as a cautionary tale. I was hesitant at first, having had my fill of media attention, but Amanda convinced me that it could help push for legislative changes. "Your story is powerful, Nathan," she said. "If sharing it again can help prevent this from happening to someone else, is not that worth it?" She was right, of course. I agreed to the interview, and a film crew came out to Scottsdale a few weeks later. They interviewed me, Miguel, Sophia, and several other neighbors. They filmed the new houses, my restored backyard, and the neighborhood coming together for a block party. The segment aired a month later, and it reignited discussion about HOA reform across the country. I received emails and messages from people all over the United States who had dealt with their own HOA nightmares. None were quite as dramatic as ours, but the stories of harassment, excessive fines, and power-hungry board members were depressingly common. I responded to as many as I could, offering advice and encouragement. Some people asked if I would be willing to speak to their community groups or testify at legislative hearings. I did a few, though I tried not to let it take over my life. Karren Whitmore was released on parole after serving 2 years of her 4-year sentence. She moved to New Mexico to live with a relative, and I heard she was working at a retail store under a different name. Part of her parole conditions included never serving on an HOA board again and staying away from Meadowbrook Commons. I hoped she had learned her lesson, but part of me doubted it. People like Karren rarely changed. The landscaping workers who had actually lit the fire also served their time and moved on with their lives. One of them actually reached out to me a few years later, sending a handwritten letter apologizing for his role in what happened. He explained that he had been young and stupid, that he had not thought through the consequences, and that he had learned from his mistakes. I appreciated the letter, even though it did not change anything. It showed at least some capacity for growth and remorse. As time passed, the fire became a story we told, a shared history that defined our neighborhood in unexpected ways. New residents would hear about it and be shocked, asking questions and wanting to know every detail. The older residents would share their perspectives, each person adding their own memories and emotions to the narrative. It became part of the identity of our street, a reminder of what we had survived and overcome. I never took my peaceful life for granted after that. Every time I sat on my patio, every time I mowed my lawn without fear of fines, every time I saw Miguel and Sophia's lights on in their beautiful new home, I was grateful. Grateful that we had survived, that justice had been served, that the community had come together instead of falling apart. The fire had destroyed grass, fences, and homes, but it had also burned away the oppressive control of an HOA gone wrong. In its place grew something better. A real neighborhood where people looked out for each other, where rules were reasonable and enforced with common sense, where a little extra grass did not result in burned houses and prison sentences. I often wondered what would have happened if I had just mowed my lawn that weekend, if I had not been called away for work emergencies. Would Karren have found some other excuse to target me or someone else? Probably. People like her always found something to complain about, some rule to enforce, some way to exert control. The grass was just an excuse. The real problem was her belief that being HOA president gave her unlimited power to do whatever she wanted. The legal precedent set by our cases had real impact. Several states passed laws limiting HOA enforcement powers, requiring permits and oversight for any physical work done on member properties and increasing penalties for board members who acted outside their authority. It was not a perfect solution, but it was progress. HOAs across the country were forced to reevaluate their practices and rein in overzealous board members. 4 years after the fire, I attended Miguel and Sophia's housewarming party in their completed Phoenix house. It was stunning, a modern design with huge windows, solar panels, and a backyard oasis that included a pool and outdoor kitchen. They had invited the entire neighborhood, and it felt like a true celebration of resilience and community. "Can you believe we are finally here?" Sophia said to me as we stood by their new pool. 4 years ago, we had nothing, and now this. "You guys earned every inch of this," I said. "You fought through hell and came out stronger." Miguel joined us, handing me a beer. "You know what the best part is? We designed every aspect of this house ourselves. No HOA telling us what color to paint, what kind of fence to build, how tall our grass can be. This is truly ours." We toasted to freedom, to friendship, and to the future. As the sun set over the Arizona desert and I looked around at all my neighbors laughing and enjoying themselves, I realized that something good had come from the disaster after all. We had lost things that could never be replaced, but we had gained something valuable too, a real sense of community and the knowledge that we could overcome anything if we stood together. The fire that Karren Whitmore started to enforce an arbitrary rule about grass height had destroyed 3 homes and changed dozens of lives, but it had also destroyed the tyranny of an unchecked HOA and forged bonds between neighbors that would last a lifetime. In the end, the flames had burned away what was toxic and left room for something healthier to grow. I never saw my yard as just grass again after that. Every time I mowed, I thought about how something so simple had become the catalyst for so much chaos and, eventually, positive change. I kept my lawn maintained, not because I was afraid of consequences, but because I took pride in my home and my community. And if it grew an extra half-inch sometimes, nobody cared. We had learned what really mattered, and it was not perfect grass. As I left Miguel and Sophia's party that evening, walking back to my house under a sky full of stars, I felt at peace. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served. The community had healed. And Karren Whitmore, wherever she was, would have to live with the knowledge that her petty tyranny had cost her everything while bringing everyone else closer together. Life in the neighborhood continued, peaceful and normal, exactly as it should be. We had barbecues without permits, painted our doors various colors, and let our kids play in the street without fear of fines. We had become what a neighborhood should be, a place where people supported each other, respected boundaries, and understood that rigid rules and enforcement were less important than human decency and common sense. The grass grew, as grass does. We mowed it when needed. And not once did anyone suggest burning it.